Hello and welcome to the Comedian's Paradise. This is the podcast where you speak to unique mavericks, innovators, and intriguing, fascinating characters from the entertainment world. They are absolutely inspirational. They're sizzling. They are people with so many stories that will fascinate us and inspire us to chase the entertainment journey on our own terms. Now, today's guest, whoa, we're taking a bit of a little detour from the world of comedy into many different aspects of comedy, but also into journalism, science, because this lady she is like the modern day equivalent of Tony Stark, but also being a journalist. She is a mixture of so many different things. She is related to Harry Styles. No, she is. Oh, and the audio's gone. Oh, okay, it's
Oh,
not gone. Oh, right, sorry. Let's.
I was just Googling Tony Stark. I had no idea what you were talking about.
Oh. Yeah, okay, yeah. Her name. She's related to Harry Styles. She knows who Tony Stark is. Please welcome the journalist, the scientist, the comedian, Kirsty Styles.
Goodness me, that is quite an intro. Marvin, thank you so much for having me.
Yes, and have you found out who Tony Stark is?
Is he from Marvel?
Yes, he plays Iron Man.
My little sister will be very sad that I had literally no idea who you were talking about. I thought it must have been some famous sort of impresario from hundreds of years ago, but it's actually a fictional character.
Tell us a bit about yourself, Kirsty, like how you became a journalist into science, and how did you take that foray into the world of stand-up comedy?
Yeah, so I don't know whether I would even call myself a scientist. There'll be scientists complaining and spinning in their graves at this point. I wanted to be a political journalist. And unfortunately, no, my dad is not the editor of a national newspaper, which meant it was quite a hard world to break into. And I actually ended up getting a probably quite a soul destroying job working at a mobile marketing agency. Bless those people. They took a chance on me, but they invited me to move down from Warrington, where I was living in my mum's garage, to London the next week to become a communications person for a mobile marketing company, having literally no idea what mobile marketing was. And this was sort of 2011, just before everybody and his nan had a smartphone. And actually, it was quite an exciting time to sort of join what I would call a sort of the gold rush, the Klondike of the sort of 2010s, where people who'd made their money, people like Elon Musk actually, who'd made their money in the early 2000s in the digital boom, were making their money in the mobile marketing boom. And that essentially meant they were trying to work out ways to sell you stuff that you didn't need by the medium of a smartphone, and how successful have they been?
Oh, okay, okay.
So I started working for them, and then I met an editor of a trade magazine, mobile marketing magazine, it was called. And so I spent a few years sort of writing about these companies that were, it was when sort of Uber launched in this country, it was when Deliveroo launched in this country. Every single app that you've now got on your smartphone, pretty much none of those companies existed, or at least existed in their current form 10 or so years ago. And so it was sort of exciting. Tinder, making sure that you don't need to have anything other than a face to get a date these days. Apps for getting a lift, so you didn't have to, rely on your mum anymore. Apps for getting food delivered to your door, so you don't even have to learn how to cook. So sort of exciting, but for me, it was actually quite terrifying. We were, giving up all of our data at the touch of a button.
Oh, okay, okay. And like, so how did you become a comedian? And like, you also decided like, yo, journalism, so you guys are boring. Here's how to make it interesting.
I'm not quite. Well, I wouldn't say it was quite that. So I actually started doing comedy about technology. You know, urging people to realize that technology will not save us. And so I actually entered a competition with for a conference called Future Fest. And so did a little bit of comedy training with a guy called Steve Cross, who launched a network called Bright Club, if you know that, to try and make academics funny.
Okay.
And so my whole thing, it was quite a long, I would call it a diatribe, called oh god, what was it? Tech wankers, YouTube articles, I don't know, something like that. To try and make people realize that, you know, we were creating a world out of the imaginations of white, sort of well-off men who day to day didn't actually have that many problems. And so the services, the revolutionary services that they were creating, you know, were just sort of incremental, small differences to improve the lives of sort of well-off Western people. And you know, the bigger picture is that, say, 3 billion people in the world still don't have access to the internet today. Whether that's the sort of mark of progress, you know, many billions of people don't have access to sort of safe drinking water and you know, toilets. And so yeah, my whole I can't say it was funny throughout, but I was sort of urging people to realize that this sort of technology revolution was bad for us, and you know, really not bad, not great for the world. um Now I'm doing a PhD where I'm looking at the environmental impact of media. And so what I can now tell you with certainty is that not only are these services not necessarily changing anyone's lives in any radical way, but they're also really bad for the planet. You know, you've got to mine all of the minerals in to put them into the smartphones and all of the other sorts of bits and bobs that you need. You've got to send them over to, and that's in the sort of, you know, in Central Africa, you know, massive conflict zones over these minerals. You've got to send them over to mostly Asian countries for people who are often trafficked to assemble them, and send them, you know, as if none of this happened, in a beautiful box to people like us. And you know, you need
Oh,
Wi-Fi. You need Wi-Fi that's constantly connected, which has an environmental impact. You know, most of these services are powered by advertising, which requires that people buy all this extra crap that they don't even need. So yeah, so I've gone on I went on you know, it's been a sort of 10-year journey for me, going from sort of starting to understand all this stuff to being like, wow, this stuff is terrifying.
so how bloody hell! That is incredible. Because one of the big things, I mean, so many. I mean, you know this as well, of doing stand up yourself. Like this, with a lot of newer comics, a lot of older comics advise you not to tackle deep or really sort of stuff. But I
Oh
mean,
shit, no, no one's ever told me that.
oh, okay. But it's the thing. They often say once you've been doing it for years and once you get a bit better and you've established it, then you start going to the dark, deep stuff. And like with when you're new, you do the lighter stuff. But yeah, that must have taken a hell of a lot of effort to bloody make that funny. That is deep stuff. That is deep stuff. How did you know, you take your first forward to stand up and you're going into the deep, heavy stuff of the truth. How did you make it funny? That must
Mm.
have being bloody awesome at the end.
Yeah, I mean, some of this stuff
Whoa.
was, it's tricky, and you know, I still, a friend of mine said to me, you know, that what you do isn't really stand up; it's more like a sort of TED talk with some jokes. Which I wouldn't mind, you know, doing that, you know, as an alternative. You know, it feels to me, I don't know, that I did a comedy competition, and I was one of two women, and everybody else's material was like, w- mainly worried that they might be a paedophile. I didn't know that men were so
Woo.
preoccupied with this, but like, you know, so that was the sort of level of comedy, or like being rude about their kids, that sort of stuff. Really, you know, sort of, I guess, stuff that we can all relate to. I don't have children, but like stuff that, you know, a lot of people could maybe relate to. And yeah, so then I wheeled on, and this one was actually about about how cycling can save the world. And people are a bit like, back that pedophile guy. That was good. So you know, it's tricky. I've done comedy about climate change, technology, and journalism as well. Stuff that I believe really matters. Um, and there are jokes in there. Yeah, but ultimately, the sort of the camera turns around to the audience, and you have to go, "We all need to do something about this," and that's the end.
It can, I mean, I watched a very, I remember years back. Do you know Funzing?
No.
They're like a experienced ticketing agency, and I used to run. I'd still run comedy shows with them. I promote with them. Um, they, I went over to this event where this guy was talking about being kidnapped by the Taliban. I know this is going a bit dark already, but let's go in there. It wasn't funny what he was talking about, but some of the situations, because it was so grim and so brutal, end up being quite funny because it was true and so brutal. The situation, it wasn't meant to be funny, but it ended up being quite funny, which I found quite surprising in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. For me, comedy is a much better way than, well, not necessarily much better way, an interesting uh, sort of comparison to journalism for communicating things that matter. You know, journalism arguably is the means by which we as people sort of understand the world and potentially are able to use that information to take action. But, you know, so often it appears that we're sort of paralyzed. You know, we feel overwhelmed, and people avoid the news and things like that. So one of the reasons that I started doing some of this stuff was to try to take information to people and deliver it to them in a way that they might enjoy, you know, with a bit of a
Yeah,
serious message at the end. And you know, it's maybe tricky, yeah, to always make it super funny. No, in fact, these shows have all, I would say they have all been funny, but you know, it's tricky to when you're in a room full of other comedians who aren't really necessarily trying to hammer home, you know, an important message, and maybe the audience just want to sort of be amused and go home, and they don't want to have to sort of, you know, sign up to Amnesty or whatever.
hmm. But it is. Do you? One of the things that often I sometimes see is people try and be like Louis C.K. or they try and beat like Doug Stanhope or someone like Dave Chappelle, and they try and give a message. When you were doing comedy with the journalism, was there any particular comic or anyone that you saw of when you're doing that, or you just sort of you thought of how can I make it funny in my own way?
Mm. Um, to be honest, I just really like making people laugh. And when I was working as a journalist, I really sort of prided myself on being able to speak to, you know, a kid or like a CEO, and like 9 times out of 10, you can really build a connection with somebody. You know, I chat to people on the bus, and you know, the more you know about the world, the easier it is to sort of um uh find something that you might both have in common. You know, I have a class of sports journalists who I teach at the moment, and so I really don't care too much for football, but I actually think it's interesting from a sort of social action perspective. But also, I know that they care about it, and so I, you know, chuck in a few things about sort of stuff I've heard on the radio about the football, and they enjoy that, even though they know that I'm not sort of, you know, really committed to what I'm saying. You know, I like to make people laugh, and I find it one of the hardest things is when your you know main means of sort of building camaraderie with people is making them laugh, and some people really don't want to laugh with you. um, so you know, you sort of you can't win them all, but I think it's a really important sort of means of sort of personal communication, and you know, um, general communication, and it's perhaps wasted if we only think about, you know, just making people laugh. You know, can it do more than what we sort of usually expect?
Hmm. It makes it a bit more. It makes journalism, either when you're like reporting or watching a documentary, or if you're reading in a paper or hearing a lecture about it, it makes it more interesting rather than stale. If it looks like someone from accounts has come round and just writing a report, then you're gonna fall asleep.
I think the tricky thing is, so sort of caveat what I just said. The tricky thing is, so I did so Stand Up For Journalism was a sort of research project, and the idea was that yeah, people don't necessarily trust journalists, but people absolutely love comedy. So what if journalists did stand up comedy? Would that change how people how people understood what journalism is for and why people do it and things like that. And so they were sort of my noble aims. The tricky thing, and I've got a good body of research to demonstrate this. The tricky thing is that often people are trying to get the joke. And so they're sort of thinking, oh, why was that funny? And so they're therefore sort of not engaged with the actual message that comes next. Or they, because it's funny, it does to some extent trivialize the issue. There's a very good study done about the Jon Stewart, the Daily Show, and there've been a few sort of similar studies in that area. And so yeah, it's tricky to sort of use an amusing vehicle to spread a message. They were looking at, particularly when they were trying to talk in the US about net neutrality, whether some people would have to be able to pay more for the internet to get like an internet fast lane. And comedy was really good for bringing that issue to audiences who'd never heard about it. So people started actually talking about this idea of net neutrality, which is great. But they didn't necessarily understand the seriousness of the issue because Jon Stewart's sort of laughing about it and what have you. So it's not without its flaws. But journalism, straight journalism, isn't without its flaws. People are switching off. People can go and look at all sorts of other sort of global media brands that don't try to give you the heavy message. So it's tricky, I would say.
But it's like with anything, if things don't evolve, then they become stale and they die. Like one of the guests on the podcast says to me with comedy, one of the things that often happen is if a comic's been going for years, they do the same set for 10, 20 years, it gets boring, it's stale, they're going through the motions. And then it gets to the stage where it becomes unfunny. And it gets to a stage where either you go out or you leave. And is that what you see in journalism in a way, in terms of like with so many things, you got to go ahead and you got to keep growing, or what's the thought?
It's tricky.
I don't know.
We've not necessarily done these topics in a logical order, so this might be slightly confusing. But yeah, no, journalism, to me matters, or at least people being informed. Whether it's sort of your local government, or national government, or about companies and how they work, or international economics or whatever. Those are big topics, and I'm sure not everybody has got the time or the inclination to sort of become well versed on all of those things. So journalism, at least as it's been delivered for the last maybe sort of 100 years, tries to give you enough information so you can sort of make decisions or take action on, but only in the space that it has. And when the newspaper was the sort of dominant way that people got information, it sort of told you which was the most important stuff because that's on the front page and whatever. With online media, what's difficult to perhaps understand is what's the most important, or how these stories relate to each other. If you're not reading something day after day after day, a similar product, that context of how change is happening sort of disappears. And if you read news but it's delivered to you by sort of social media people who picked up on certain things, you're getting this information at random. And I can really appreciate how that feels sort of frightening to people, because you don't know which issue is very important and how these things all fit together. So we're certainly at a time where the model of news delivery has changed, and yet people to some extent still need some a reasonable level of information, although some people would say I never read the news and I can live quite fine. So I don't know, it's all debatable. That's what I say to my students.
You mean, what's it called? What's the word for it? They say patterns and never mind. Each to their own. Each to their own's the saying, isn't it?
Yeah, which is sort of fine, but we all collectively pay tax, in most, if not all countries, because we agree that there is some sort of like shared responsibility and shared things that we all need. Things like clean air, things like roads, things like education, are all things that sort of are not each to their own. We've all, to some extent, we have a stake in it, certainly. Whether we participate in deciding what that stake is another question. These things do happen regardless, but For me, I do think it's important that people are involved, because otherwise decisions get made for you, and actually you're still sacrificing some of your salary for those decisions to be made on your behalf. So yeah, I don't know whether each to their own quite cuts it for me.
Oh, all right. uh, what what would you say? So, what's often a thing that surprises you, annoys you with journalism? Like, what's something that when when you tell people that you're a journalist, what's the most silly thing that often comes across? Like, if someone says they're a comedian, they say, "Tell us a joke." Do they say, "Oh, go on, then write us an article"?
Well, I mean, I live in Liverpool, and if you know anything about the history and politics of Liverpool, you'll know that people, they don't sell they wouldn't even say the word "the Sun" here, because of the Hillsborough disaster, 96 Liverpool fans killed in Sheffield. And the police and the media pinned it on the fans, and we now know that wasn't it wasn't the fans' fault at all. And so yeah, so journalists don't have a great reputation where I live. I think in general that there's people, as I say, one of the reasons I did the Stand Up For Journalism and had done the research was because people don't trust journalists. They trust them less than estate agents. They trust them less than sort of corporations and governments. So they're this sort of routinely disliked sort of members of society. But when you speak to journalists, if you're a war reporter, you are going into conflict zones. The first person to arrive, the last person to leave, and you don't have specialist sort of training. You go there to whether there's sort of war, civil war, any sort of environmental disaster, because you believe in people's right to know, or that people need to know, and that if people are losing their lives, that those lives mattered, and somebody should be held responsible, perhaps. And so it's a shame that people think journalists are, I don't know, people seem to think that, like, Katie Hopkins is a journalist and she's not. And there's loads of sort of public figures today who aren't really trained journalists, and are just people who've got opinions, and that might well be fine, but they don't sit day after day, writing stories to keep people informed about these massive global or local issues that are going on. So that's a shame. That's a shame for me, really, that journalists have such a bad reputation. And Hillsborough aside, I don't necessarily see exactly where that comes from. Yes, that's probably one of the main things.
I think it's because
Not funny, is it?
go on. No, I mean it's. I think people, movies and like programs also have a big effect on how things get perceived. I mean, what's it called? Part of what's in my head is in that Godzilla film when you see the. Have you not seen the night? Oh, there's a story with this girl's trying to progress it up in a news agency with an ex-boyfriend or whatever, and he. This is a long-winded story, but a lot of us have an idea that you're looking for a story to sell rather than, like, I mean, you look at the Watergate scandal. That was what happened there. Those journalists did a good job. They exposed them and they did something that was good. But a lot of us feel that a lot of the news or reporters or people like writing articles, you want to make a story that's going to sell and get attention and help your career rather than actually doing a good. That's what's often portrayed sometimes in films. You're looking for a good story to sell rather than to help people.
Yeah, so I'd say the biggest criticism of the industry itself, and this is part of my PhD, is that because the media in general, and journalism particularly, has for a relatively long time relied an awful lot on advertising money, and in the digital world, it's only been more amplified, and that means that they have to get as many people reading a story as possible. Eyeballs is what you would call them, and you're competing with any other global media that is out there, and that makes it tricky to write stories that are important. Clickbait literally was the name for BuzzFeed when it came over to the UK, and they were writing stories that, for whatever reason, people want to click on. Now, partly that's the fault of the media, because the media, does work with advertisers who want to get clicks on their adverts, and so that's a structural problem with the industry itself. But people click on these stories. The local newspapers are absolutely awash with stories about crime, and people believe that crime is more likely to happen to them because of how much it gets covered. But it gets covered because people click on it. So it's like a sort of cyclical thing, where people like to look at car accidents, and that's why you get traffic jams. It's a little bit similar. So partly it's the industry's fault, but also I'm interested in what people are really interested in, because reading stories about crime, is a waste of time in a lot of ways. Compared to reading an important story about, I don't know, your local council or whatever. Not sexy, but it's much more likely to have an impact on you, what your local council is doing, than what some big crime, murder that's happened is going to have an impact on you.
But it's like that because they want to get things that get emotion in you. Like they say in social media, when they're doing hooks to grab your attention, they want things that draw an emotion from you so that they keep your attention and they want you to stay on there and to do what they want. Is that some of the things? Well, you mentioned a bit in newspaper articles and there, but yeah.
News historically, I would say no, was really objective, and that I use the word objective loosely because it's very hard to be truly objective. But the news reported on the issues of the day, not, and really didn't do a lot more. Increasingly, because of the competition, as I just said, and this sort of requirement to get clicks for advertising, the news has become much more sort of sensationalized than I would say it ever was. If you look at sort of the social media accounts of newspapers compared to what they actually write about, the social media accounts are much more sort of emotive in how they draw you in than the actual story that you go on to read. So it's mechanics of the industry as much as it is anything, but also that's what people click on. And so to some extent, this is a question of what people are interested in. People absolutely love crime. What's it called? True crime. That's such a massive sort of category of podcasts and streaming services. True crime is so irrelevant to your life, as much as it might be interesting to find out how this person killed 15 people or whatever. It will not have an impact on your life, and maybe that's why people watch it. But like, investing so much time in true crime as people do, when they could be actually understanding how their society works, for me it's a shame that that's how the sort of how things have gone.
But it's something that's very difficult to change. But what would you think is the way of changing it?
Well, I mean, it's, to be honest, this behavior is probably less than 10 years old. This like super amped up, like, world on steroids, where you can have. Did you watch the film Bo Burnham?
Not yet, no.
Oh my God, do go watch it. So yeah, he's got this song called A Little Bit of Everything all of the time. And like the internet, and huge access to the internet in particularly in Western countries, and how all of those sort of technologies are created to get you to use them more. That is a relatively new phenomenon. In fact, an incredibly new phenomenon compared to like how long we lived like in woods. And so actually, I think it's quite an easy behavior to change because it's actually quite new. The tricky thing is obviously if people want to change their behavior, given that they might enjoy getting a pizza delivery or a girlfriend at the swipe of a screen. But it's not, it isn't beyond the realms of possibility. I do have an answer for it, but I don't know whether you wanted to come back in on that.
No, go on. Let's tell us your answer.
Well, the thing is, and I've got a few books that would help us to understand this. How our lives aren't actually making us particularly happy. We have got absolutely everything that we could possibly need and more times a million, and particularly relative to some people in other parts of the world, and also relative to anybody that's ever lived ever before. We've got a guy that's building bloody rockets in his back garage, as well as electric cars and social media companies. Like, we have got unprecedented concentrated wealth in certain countries, and yet people are the most lonely that they've ever been, the most unsatisfied. People have got not got a lot of social connections. People haven't got a lot of friends. And so the answer for me is people, well, I guess, to recognize that and come back into their local communities, put the phone down, and meet older people in your local area who need stuff doing for them, help them fix their sort of TV or whatever, that must sound idealistic, and there is a role for local journalism in that, because local journalism has been dismantled in the last sort of 20 years, in the UK at least. And so obviously people would have to recognize that technology will not save us. The internet is not the answer. Whether that's an easier thing to recognize and do something about than it is to just sort of chuck on another Netflix documentary, I don't know.
Written by Kirsty Stiles.
Sorry, we've gone from heavy to heavy to heavy.
If Netflix said, Kirsty Stiles, we want a documentary on that, would you say yes?
Yeah, probably would. Yeah. I mean, there's a book called "The Internet Is Not the Answer," and it was a guy who'd made a lot of money in this sort of stuff, and he was just like terrified of what it had become. I really am not the first person to notice or say this. But yeah, that's my sort of my answer is spiritual sort of reinvigoration, I guess.
Oh, so you believe in the chakras and like
No,
meditation
not
and all
that. I
that?
mean, whoever your gods and your goddesses and whoever else, like, that's not sort of critical to me. But I think. I mean, no. Obviously, you can believe in whatever you want, but irrespective of what anybody sort of believes as faith, we are all humans. We are here for a small amount of time, and I think it's Islam that says this well. You're supposed to leave the world better than you found it, and at the moment, we're just sort of, living sort of, as though time and sort of space and things don't matter.
No. Oh God, stop it! You're gonna make me cry.
I know I keep stumping you. I'm sorry. This
No,
has
it's all good.
not been the easy breezy, free flowing interview.
No, it's all good. What's are you like still performing now? Like, are you doing comedy and getting involved in?
Yeah. So I did a stand-up show. I put together a stand-up show last month.
And is your niche gonna be? Are you involved in a lot of like stand up sort of, as you mentioned, what you with being in a journalism and tech? Is that going to be maybe your comedy sort of?
Well, at the moment, I'm doing comedy about cycling because we're like, we need to solve this climate crisis. What do we need to do? We need to invent something. We need to go to Mars. The answer is not go to Mars. The answer is, like, just get out on your bike. Yeah. And I know that sounds very simplistic, but our culture has become dominated by a few things in the last sort of 50 years. One of them is the car, and one of them is the internet, and the bike has been around for just almost 150 years, and it is the most efficient form of transport that exists. You are not creating carbon emissions. It makes you more attractive to everyone that you meet. It's pretty safe. It's really cheap, and there's loads and loads of benefits to it, and it's good for you, and you can meet people. For me, whenever anybody says they have a problem with absolutely anything, I say, have you considered riding a bike? It's so good for you in so many different ways, you know, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It exists. So, I mean, and as you've probably got the sense that I've not told you absolutely any jokes yet. So I could tell you some jokes about cycling. Would you like to hear them?
Oh yes, yes. No, go on.
Oh, I don't even know whether because all of my comedy has like a really big preamble. It's
No,
built, it's layers of stuff. So I apologize if this is not funny at all. I've got a section of dad jokes which are in honor of the person that taught me to ride a bike, my dad, Les Styles. And so the dad jokes are things like I can't do the first one because I don't think you'll find that funny. Let me just think of what the second one is. Why did the cyclist cross the road?
why did he cross the road?
Because they were taking a strong and safe position to turn right, and that's perfectly legitimate in the new highway code.
Oh.
I mean, I don't think you found it that funny. What you might know this, Joe. So this is a play, another play, and an old joke. Do you know the joke? What do you do if you see a spaceman?
No, what'd you do?
So the answer in the past would be to park in it, man. So if you see a spaceman, you park in it, man. Yeah, oh, a driving joke. But in my joke, you look over to your left, notice there's a cyclist coming down your left-hand side, give them an encouraging wave, and 1.5 meters distance. So if they fell off their bike, you don't smash their brain into the floor. This is only for the cyclist, but I will explain it to you as well. Okay, what's the cyclist's favorite cheese?
What's the favorite cheese?
So the answer is paneer. You know the cheese paneer.
Okay, yep.
On the back of your bike, you have these bags called panniers.
Oh.
So it's paneer, panier,
Okay.
paneer. And so I dice around with that for a little bit. And then I say, I actually had an ex-boyfriend who every time I'd say paneer, he'd say panier. And I'd say paneer, and he'd say panier. And he died.
Oh. Oh, jeez.
What do you call an unhappy cyclist?
Boris Johnson.
There's no such thing as an unhappy cyclist.
Oh, okay.
And there's one about oral sex, but it takes some context, so I can't tell you that one.
Okay, fair enough. Cool. Now that is how much, and where do they buy the book on cyclist jokes?
Well, there is a book called Revolutions: How Women Change the World on Two Wheels, which isn't funny, but that's where I took some of my information from because essentially, as I say, bikes were invented, or bikes in this form that we understand them were invented almost 150 years ago. And almost immediately, would you believe that men tried to stop women riding them?
Oh.
That's true. They said they would make you infertile. They said that they would make your face stick like that, which I assume they meant that was the face of pure joy, which no man has ever seen. And they said that it would make women more promiscuous, and they were right. Sociologists in the US and the UK credit cycling with reducing the amount of birth defects in the local population at the turn of the last century. Yes, queens.
Oh, right.
But really, it meant that women could get away. Somebody stop her.
With so that's cool, but that's
Sorry, that's the cycle. That's some of the cycling stuff for you. But yeah, no, I mean, yeah. Sorry, I'll let you go.
It's so. If I was to describe you, should I call you a comic journo tech? Is that what you're gonna be?
Well, the technology stuff is a bit of a red herring. So as I say, I was a technology journalist, but not by choice. But when I got into it, I realized it was very political, and so I was happy to be there. But the problem is that I was a business journalist, so I was writing about businesses. And while I understood why businesses do what they do, I didn't particularly we didn't have like I didn't particularly get my stories out to a huge audience, and I wasn't supposed to be writing about the politics of this stuff. I was just supposed to be reporting on what these companies did, and a lot of the stuff that they did I found quite distressing. So So I was only a technology journalist by accident, but it did give me a lot of material. That was good. So I don't necessarily do a lot of writing about technology today, but a lot of this stuff has informed, the PhD that I'm doing and the teaching that I do, because I'm a lecturer in journalism as well. So I'm grateful that I got to be involved in all of this stuff. But it was very terrifying. And actually, back to the thing about people not reading interesting stories, or people not reading important stories. When I had one job where I was consumer facing, so it was a B2C publication, so a big tech website, and I could only write stories if they were going to get a certain amount of people reading them. And so when the government was about to introduce spying laws to make sure that they could spy on the entire population really easily using the digital technologies, I couldn't write that story unless enough people would read it. And enough people wouldn't read it, even though it was important. So, it was really disheartening to know that I'd really had the opportunity to sort of unearth a lot of this stuff. But in the economics of journalism, you can't write it today often unless it's going to get enough eyeballs on it. And people don't want to read stuff that makes them sad. They want to watch bullshit TV.
Well, there's a comedian called, ex-comedian called Konstantin Kizin, and he wrote a book called "Immigrants' Love Letters to the West." But he's from Russia. It's a famous podcast called Trigonometry, but it's very controversial. So some people may like it, some people don't. I like it. It's because they get a lot of people from different sides of the spectrums, different political arguments, whatever you name. And he called it "Immigrants' Letter to the West" because it has a more catchy title than just saying "Immigrants' Letter to the UK," because that's where he's been. But he said to the West because it sounds more attractive. And in some ways, do you have to maybe lie a bit in some articles or trick them a bit to get people to pay attention? If you say, I don't know, if you say this, how Botox will cure the world's need on technology, that will get attention, even though that may not be true. It takes. Do you have to be a bit crafty now?
Well, you probably do. I wouldn't really subscribe to doing it, but there's a fundamental tension between. So journalists, it's hard to be objective, as I said, because we all come from different experiences, and so the facts that we observe, are different to everybody to a certain extent. But one of the things that journalists are supposed to really commit to is an idea of accuracy and truth and things like that. And so it's pretty. It's pretty hard to both be accurate and true and everything like that, and to do what you've just described, much as it's understandable from a sort of strategic perspective. It's a really tricky time to be a journalist that wants to write stories that are possibly objectively fundamentally important, given the sort of economics of the internet.
It's a bit, yeah. It's one of those things. But I think it's a time we're in in terms of comedians as well. Sometimes some comics have to try and do things that they're not necessarily behind just to market themselves, or to try and get followers, and they do things that they're not necessarily okay with, but they do it so they can.
And that's why it's hard to be, I would say, so I think so journalists don't have to, so other doctors have to take an oath, which is essentially do no harm, and there are loads of other professions where you have to subscribe to this sort of these ethical and real sort of legal commitments, and journalists strangely don't have that, but the training does to a certain extent, and I certainly took away from it the ethics of journalism and the moral responsibility of informing people. So, but I would have thought, given that you don't have to sign anything, lots of journalists probably don't really think like I do, and are happy to go down the same. Ultimately, it's about getting lots of people to see what you're doing. So if the way to do that is to market yourself in the way like you described, then I guess people would do that. And I can understand. There's no point knowing all the answers if there's nobody listening? Does the tree fall in the woods? So I can understand why people in any sort of public sort of profession would feel compelled to sort of chase the audience.
But now it's going on to like, you created something where you married two worlds together: journalism, well, three worlds together: journalism, comedy, and tech. A while ago, like you did a show, and you're still doing sort of shows that are covering those topics. Like, how has that sort of helped you as a journalist, and how, like in terms of doing comedy and all those things together, and how did it help other people who were involved in that show you put on a while back?
Yeah, so Standup For Journalism, yes, so that was more about just it was just journalists doing stand-up comedy, so tech sort of less so, apart from the fact that I was a tech journalist. The idea is, well, in fact, so I stole the idea from something called Bright Club, which is a organization which tries to make academics funny. And so if we could make academics funny, obviously we can make journalists funny, that's fine. And what it did do was get some journalists, the journalists who are involved, to actually try to come up with something that they would say in public. Journalists are quite obviously you see sort of presenters on TV, but like journalists are not sort of hugely public people. You know, the people that you see who are talking about a lot of stuff are maybe influencers and things like that. Journalists have never historically been particularly sort of loud and public people. So I think it challenged some of them to really think about what they would say. The tricky thing was, back to what I said about the economics of the internet. What most of them identify, as I identified, is that it's very hard to be faithful to what journalism is supposed to do, or what we believe that journalism is good, it should do, and to operate in the economy as it exists today. And so some of their stories gave weight to that idea. It's hard to be a journalist today if you want to be faithful to sort of the facts and everything like that. And so at the end of the comedy, the tricky thing is that I had three measures for the audience. So it was, how much do you believe in like the person's intention to do a good job based on what you've just heard? How much do you believe in their ability to do a good job based on what you've just heard? And how much do you believe in their commitment to doing responding to what their audience wants? And that people, it was really good at getting across that human side. So people really believed in their ability, in their sort of intention. It was really great to hear that a journalist really cared about what they were doing, but their ability is hampered by the world as it is. And so they were really just exposing a lot of what I've just said. It is hard to be faithful to be a journalist today, because that's not how the world works. The world is sort of for sale, and journalism isn't a sort of necessarily a saleable good.
So, is it like one of those sayings where often, if you go into a fighting gym or certain places, they say that the loudest person is the weakest or the most stupid person? And is that what you would say that's maybe happening now in certain instances, in terms of like, because you're saying that in journalism, like people who have actually aimed to research things and see what's going on don't tend to talk or be loud about things, and saying that it's influencers and.
Well, no, actually, I mean, in fact, I'll row back slightly, because I think what the promise of the internet is this idea of a democratic information space, you might call it, and it enables people to connect in ways that they never would have been able to find people who are similar to them or into the same stuff. So there's loads of virtues to it, and gives voice to a lot of people who have a legitimate voice to have. I think that just the tricky thing is, if journalism is even good at this, but the tricky thing is, to some extent, journalism has a process to check the facts and whatever, and it's difficult to distinguish, therefore, between what is sort of a fact that has been checked and what is sort of just made up. And some people are making up information on purpose to confuse people. And so, not that journalism has necessarily all the answers or is necessarily the best vehicle for sort of solving this problem, but we now live in a world where it's quite hard to distinguish fact from not fact, if indeed you could say that facts exist at all. And there are bad actors purposefully trying to confuse people. So but I'm sure that that many influencers have had a meaningful impact on people, like people who talk about illnesses and disabilities and all sorts of people who've become public figures and normalized experiences and behaviors that would never have had voice, even in mainstream journalism. Mainstream journalism, by the way, has been historically completely crap at diversity.
Yeah.
It was as it is in many professions, who you know, not what you know. Incredibly white, incredibly more than middle class, particularly like so limited to people who graduated from Oxford and Cambridge. And those people might have been sort of well trained in sort of whatever they get trained in at Oxford and Cambridge, but they did not have a diversity of experience. And it's the same thing with the world of tech. One of the similarities that I was really interested in was, for example, Google Maps doesn't have, and historically never had, any options for sort of accessibility. So if you were to go around a corner and you were in a wheelchair, Google Maps would have no way to tell you that. And if they had sat down at the beginning and there had been somebody who had a disability or had somebody in their family with a disability, and they could have said, oh, if we build this feature in from the beginning, this will be much more meaningful because actually 1 in 6 people in the world have a disability. Google Maps could have been so much more, but because they were, as it happens at Google, Stanford, Harvard, whatever, from a very, very limited sort of demographic, they weren't solving radical problems because they didn't know these radical problems existed. And to a certain extent, journalism has experienced the same problem. It didn't know. I'm trying to think what something that it really, really didn't know. It certainly has not represented Black and minority ethnic groups in the UK well at all, and only represents those people, in stories about crime, and has been very bad at sort of representing the positives of being anything other than white.
Okay.
Sorry. This is supposed to be a comedy podcast.
No, I mean, yes, but it's always interesting. I mean, so in that other question that I was asking, I'm just trying to find out, as I like chatting to people with different viewpoints, different things. I much rather feel silly about things or stupid and learn something rather than think that I know about things and not know anything. And what's the point?
Do you disagree with me, or are you just
What's going on? Is there a ghost? You're moving it around. No. On our last, what would you say? So with you being in media, with comedy and journalism, what would you say are the great things that comedy and journalism have that are similar in terms of the people and in terms of the way they work? And not mentioning like what we said earlier about before in terms of sometimes getting ahead because of who you know rather than what you know.
I mean, it's all about public communication for me, and that's why I think that sometimes comedy can be a bit wasted when it's too frivolous. It's an opportunity to speak to people, and sometimes that can be really meaningful. And so I guess that's sort of what attracts me to both of them.
Okay. Have a chance to meet people. Okay. And what do you feel? No, I think that's mostly it. I think what have been moments in your life that have shaped you the most, and what have been painful moments? What have been really painful experience that you're able to talk about that have taught you the most, and that you would like to share to any would-be journalist or comedian who's listening now?
Oh, well, I shan't share my painful family experiences, although I'm sure they have shaped me. Let me just have a think about that. I mean, I really didn't think I was going to get to be a journalist. I was going to the job centre with all this experience in Warrington, and they were like, "Wow, you should be a journalist." And I was like, "Yes, do you have any journalism jobs, please?" And they were sending me to go and get a job at a coffee place and to be a receptionist, which was not what was in my plan. And so, at that point, I didn't, think that I was going to get to do and be this thing that I'd sort of trained to be, which was a very sad time. And then I did it for sort of 5 years, full time, and actually, interestingly, and I got a job, my dream job at my sort of favorite title, and it wasn't the job it wasn't what I'd expected it to be, and it wasn't actually as what I'd imagined, and so I've changed course to a reasonable amount to get into academia to sort of try and commit some of what I've learned to paper. So, what I learned is well, you you should do go for it. In terms of trying to get these jobs, the jobs are out there. And if things change, then do something different. I'm not. People sort of ask me when I'm going to decide what I really want to be, and I think, I'm in a, luxurious position. Being in one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Not experiencing sort of um, a lot of dreadful things which happen to people, where I do have a bit of luxury to try things, and I think we spend a lot of time worrying. I certainly do, about doing the right thing and what's the right thing to do and things. And my mum just says, just do your best.
Just do your best.
Yeah, just do your best. My dad says be good. Can't promise anything.
And what do you say after? What does he say afterwards?
Oh, he says, just keep pedaling and be good.
So you're saying is, I, so just give it a best shot and see what happens. Treat it like a surfer and like a wave.
Yeah, and if you've got sometimes I don't. Yeah, sometimes you're doing things that you really don't think are the dream thing. And in fact, my dad always does tell me just to have paid employment. It's better to have a job while you're looking for another one than it is to sort of throw in the towel. But yeah, I think we only have one life, and it's important to find real meaning. And luckily, I absolutely love doing stand up. I think being able to sort of have that opportunity to sort of communicate with other people and hopefully make them laugh, I think is a real, as I say, a real luxury. And yeah, so try to do something that matters.
If you were to be like a full-time stand-up like comedian doing what you do, would you take it? Like in terms of like doing shows, making
I
people
think
laugh and educating people.
I think the only thing is it's probably tricky to make the economics of it work. I've not looked into it in enough detail to be honest, because my dad always said, sorry, just to go back to him, that's not a real thing. So I've not pursued it as much. I do it, whenever somebody asks me, or whenever I've got something that I've sort of been working on, but I don't prioritize it because, in a way, it doesn't feel as stable as what you imagine a stable job is. But I lecture now and you know, edit books and things like that. So I've got quite a few things that I can do, and so it feels I lead bike rides as well, and I want to be a bike mechanic, and so you know I found like a sort of a suite of things that like fit for me in terms of what I think matters. And you know, it would be a joy to well, it is a joy to do the comedy, and I can sort of do it as I am without too much pressure. I mean, if somebody wanted to give me a TV show or whatever, that would be great.
Okay, here it is. You can take.
I'm trying to finish my PhD, so I really should put the. I should
Okay.
stop doing things that are just silly.
Okay. What about horse riding? Horse riding's good as well. I mean, people, cyclists are quite gorgeous, but so are people on horses.
I don't know. I think in terms of, I don't know whether that was supposed to be a joke, but horses you have to feed the horses. They're probably quite expensive. You have to look after them. I mean, I look after my bike. I do my own bike repairs, but I don't have to like give it carrots, etc. Whatever horses eat. Yeah, you need to have a field. Like I've got 2 bikes in my back room.
Well, maybe they'll domesticate a different kind of horse where it doesn't need much space.
I've got a different kind of horse. It's called a bike.
Now, for anyone that's listening on right now and they're saying, "My God, Kirsty, you are vavavoom."
Dream girl.
What was that?
Dream girl?
Of course, of course. Yeah, for anyone that says, "Kirsty, you are a dream girl. You are like vavavoom ou une sais quoi ce soir." Is that the word?
I mean, that wasn't the greatest French I've ever heard, but good try.
For anyone that says, "Yo, vavavoom," just what's it called? Tu es magnifique. How do they find out about you?
Oh, I mean, I don't really do that much on social media. I just can't buy into it. But you could just type Kirsty Styles into Google and you could probably find me. You did.
Of course. That's, just look
Oh
at the
no, you
Google.
tapped in stand-up journalism.
Yeah.
Let's see. I mean, yeah, the best place to find me is probably on LinkedIn, which is tragic. But you can also find me on Facebook and Twitter.
Yep. She's got a big website as well, so you can drop her an email like I did to get on the podcast.
Yes. That's a terrible website. For somebody who makes websites for other people, it's not very good.
And she lives in Liverpool. She lives right in the Anfield football stadium.
Thereabouts. Why not? Yeah, no, I live in Liverpool. Yeah, always up for meeting up with people if people are interested in bike ride and a laugh or something.
Yeah, she'd do both at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's where you need to go. And if you like this episode, guys, you can give this episode, you can subscribe, give this podcast a review and 5-star review on Amazon or iTunes. And hopefully I'll see you in the next episode. We got a comedy couple talking tomorrow, talking about autism and stuff like that. And then we got a actor and director from the world of comedy sketches coming in. So we got lots of fumbles, lots of joys, and I'll speak to you soon.